Our final presentation today, again from another one of our platinum sponsors. We could not have AusCERT the way we do without the support of our platinum sponsors, talking on threat intelligence and automating security processes from the good people at Threat Connect. This is Director of Sales Engineering at Threat Connect, Chris Adams. Give Chris a round of applause, all yours.
Thank you. All right, intelligence. The first time I really thought about the challenges of intelligence in a defensive perspective is following 9/11. And when you think about all the information that came out following the attacks, if you're like me, all this information was coming in, and you felt like, how could this not be obvious, right? That's the benefit of hindsight. But if you really think about the types of things that were going on, if we think about the pilots, for example, okay, pilots are being trained on U.S. soil, both in California and in Florida. You had 6 of those pilots who were frequently traveling between the United States and Saudi Arabia frequently. 4 or some number of those were involved in the Hamburg cell in Germany, so there's obvious link there. And actually 2 of the pilots failed their training for Cessnas, and even though they had failed training, they had asked to train on Boeing, large aircraft. And so in hindsight, when all this comes out, you think, how could they not have connected the dots? Well, you have to think that there are over 15,000 trainings per year. All the systems independent, right? There is no one giant system where all that information might be stored. You have hundreds of thousands of people traveling back and forth between the US and in places in the Middle East where there might be some cells where they were doing some type of activity, right? Or communicating with people who are orchestrating this. So that's a hard problem because these are large, disparate type systems. Some of the critique of the agencies after the fact were, criticisms on what type of processes those intel agencies had. Were their formal process connecting all those things? So in hindsight, you'd love to see that data superimposed where it becomes clear, but there was no real process to do all that. And so threat intel in the cyber realm, I believe I like to think about things in that grand perspective. Obviously, it's a different realm in cyber compared to the traditional defense. If we think about what threat intelligence means in the cyber realm, you can look at this definition by Gartner, kind of wordy. I'll let you read that real quick. My summary definition, right, is knowledge of threats and capabilities, right, of infrastructure, motive, intent, right? So if that's what threat intel is, that's not an easy thing. Right? It's hard to understand that deep when you see the types of things you're looking at day in and day out. How do you know what the real motives are? What are the capabilities? What are the infrastructures they're using? It takes time to put this picture together. And so anyone who thinks about threat intel, and everyone's at varying levels of maturity and knowledge about it, I like this. This is an idea that everyone belongs somewhere on this plot. Right? Far left, interested in it, don't really know how to engage and begin to use threat intel. I won't read through all these things in detail for the sake of time, but you can kind of think that you're beginning to start to use it. You might even begin to start creating it. You might begin tying it into things that you're seeing in incidents or in your SOC. You begin to start automating some processes. And over time, you've established a methodology, right, for creating, enriching, pulling that content in. And so, without getting into too much detail, to moving to that left side to the right, I'll just talk about 3 key things that most organizations can just think about as in, these are capabilities you want to sort of bring online. So to start, and I'll mention those being as we go through here. So to start, aggregating information, we got to be careful about words, right? We're aggregating threat data, potential. This is a lot of data. You don't know if it's intelligence yet. Intelligence comes through a process, right? But one of the key things is establishing, a repository where you're putting threat intelligence. This is one of the first practices, and just sure everybody in the room has some method. And I'll argue that even if it's an Excel spreadsheet, that's a start, right? Collecting information over time that you believe that have some knowledge that you want to share and begin to sort of enrich and grow and analyze. And so the key to that is having a data model. Right? A data model is going to help you describe where that data comes and fits in. And so those are indicator types, right? IP addresses, addresses, email addresses, hosts, URLs, malware, events. There's quite a bit there. But in the end, the goal would be to have, if you have multiple sources of threat intel, it could be from government sources, it could be AusCERT, phishing emails you have laying around the team that you realize you have to aggregate and be able to start pulling into the process. Once you begin to establish a data store where you can pull that content in, and it's sort of represented here with multiple sources, when you have an ability to deduplicate that information, normalize it, find associations across that, this is when you begin to be able to make sense out of all the information you might be pulling in. Okay, so I like to say that from my experience in working in government, you want to establish a system of record. A system of record in traditional sense means that you're building the authoritative source of threat intel for your organization. A lot of governments want to, it's a play to try to become the system of record, and I think every organization needs one. And that way, when you have analysts come and go from your team, you retain all that information and you have that to work on as things go forward. So that's a bit about aggregating threat information. The second thing is analyze. And analyzing information can mean a lot of different things. It's getting enrichment from other sources. It's being able to sort of make sense out of what type of data it is that you're looking at. And there are a few models that I think should be embraced by teams to drive that analysis work. So one of the more straightforward approaches is the diamond model for intrusion analysis. That's the idea that anything involving a threat, some type of activity, you have a bad guy, you have a good guy that's being the victim in the situation. You have infrastructure that's used to launch some type of capability. Okay, it's a crime scene, right? There's always an actor, there's always some element of that in that scenario. If you begin to think about things in that way, then you start forcing your mind when you see pieces of information, it begins to make you want to think, how do I want to organize this data? How do I want to structure it? How do I want to share it with my team? And then you get into a bit more in sort of the extent, deeper models provided. Lockheed Martin, everybody probably knows the kill chain. MITRE's more recently popular attack. Right, these get into much more granular detail, and we see a lot of products coming online that begin to support those. They're all good. To me, a team that establishes a methodology, a practice, is really the key thing. Get the team to speak in the same language. Right? That's really the key part, is building something, establishing something, so that when new people come on the team, there is a methodology approach. That's a big key part about discovery, into turning threat data into intelligence, and it establishes a best practices for your team. And I'll just give a little, for people who aren't familiar with attack. It's quite complex, but it's kind of fun to look through here. In fact, while Troy was talking, I was trying to think about where do some of these things fit in on some of those. But I like to think about it, you're looking at the whys and then the hows. If I want to establish some persistent type of presence in a network, I want to create an account, right? If I can get the account and then I want to escalate my privileges, I might use some pass-the-hash technique and start moving around somebody's infrastructure, right? So there's always sort of a mindset. Now, when you begin to pull information in and learn more about what you're saying, if you begin to start thinking, where do I classify this? It's a lot better than just having a lot of data in a spreadsheet that says, oh, I should be concerned about these things. And so that's a little bit about aggregating content, a little bit about analyzing. Until you begin to start operationalizing, and that's a loaded word, I'm familiar, but we can think we want to begin to start moving that intelligence around in our infrastructure, because until I can have 6 billion indicators with someone telling me it's all bad, it really doesn't mean anything until I find out that there's an indicator in some feed that matches data that I have in my logs, right? So that's all of a sudden your eyes are widened and you think, I got to do something, right? Because you now have some proof that that resides in your network. And so I believe threat intel becomes that lifeblood that flows through the environment, where it's really a feedback loop between your infrastructure and what it is you've learned and what it is you've pulled in. And that's not just from a system perspective. I mean, it's sometimes the fun part, the integrations and seeing how you can pull things and get products to work together. But it's also people. It's people from IR, seeing something, sharing that, collaborating within an environment becomes a very important part of that, what we call dissemination within the organization. And so when you begin to start, systems can permit that type of integrations, right? Just from, let's say, from central store via APIs. You have a new word that's making its way, SOAR, right? This is security orchestration, and being able to automate some type of response to that. Here's a pretty graphic from Gartner making this official technology. And you have really a kind of a healthy cycle here of detect, triage, respond and prioritize. There's some value in this, and I'm thinking this is like a traditional really cycle for analysis, right, and things you want to do. And being able to orchestrate processes. I'm an IT guy, I love tech, right, but I don't believe you can just automate your way out of problems. I think what you do is find ways to optimize what the team is doing. I'll show some examples of this in a minute. But orchestration is really just the concept that a team, security is maturing, right? There should be established processes, some of that of which you can automate, some that you're not. You don't need to, we're not trying to turn security into something that's, built just be self-healing. There are a reason for analysts. What SOAR does promise, and the automation part of things, is to give your analysts more time to really focus on the analysis part and relieve some time from the things that can be automated. And so I like to think, as a tech person, right, this isn't, I say down at the bottom, right, this is nothing new. It's not new in the sense that in IT in general, there's been automation forever, right? If people are old as I, back in the days when enterprise service buses were the rage and for the IT stack, right? Message queuing, web services. These are technologies that if we call security a department in an organization, like finance, logistics, operations, all the different departments you have, they have grown up stacks of products. Security just seems to be this the last to become an official department that deserves technologies to tie systems together. Many times, security stacks, they're grown organically. No one. Typically, people don't define an enterprise architecture and then start filling things in, right? Departments, they get a firewall, they get an IDS, proxy, right? Everyone knows how things go organic. And then the fight is, how do you get these things to talk to each other? And so SOAR is that realization that it's matured, that security is now becoming a first-class citizen. Because in the end, it is just data, right? And having an approach to managing that data is what we're looking for. So let's just look at a couple examples of what I think are some of the key examples for people just to think about from a malware analysis perspective. In this case, take a malware file. It could be loaded into your tip. There's some context of where it came from. File is then sent to an AMA tool. You parse the results of that, and then maybe present some of that information you came back from that report. So in that case, perhaps some IOCs that came out of what that malware did are collected. They're pulled back into your tip. Perhaps feeds that you have pulled into a central store now give some context of what that is. And if you could then search a SIM or search something, and you can see if that had some effect on you. So this is something maybe a lot of analysts will do every day. If you can automate that so that you're just seeing the results of anything you sent that, you're saving a lot of time and value over a period of time. For a little bit more sophisticated type of example, this is something we had built just to design from a customer's perspective, is what if I would take a fish, right? Everybody gets, how many phishing emails do people get inundated with every week? If I can automate a process where I'm sending every fish to an environment, we're parsing, taking off header, body, attachments, we're running all those through enrichment sources. In this case, we're looking, taking something and detonating malware in a malware analysis platform, taking that information back, and like I mentioned earlier, if you parse it and then can search your SIM and find out, have any of those indicators been in my environment? Well, maybe then my result is I create a ticket, or maybe I lock the AD account of that user just to prevent them, send them a note, Slack message that they have to talk to IT before they can log into their account again. All right, so a little bit sophisticated use case. The key is that this is all possible. These are things that you can do. You can modify those flows to your heart's content. You can introduce a person in the loop and say, before I take this step, I actually want to be able to make a decision here. I don't want something to follow all through this, right? And so the key thing to take away with this is that with the advent of automation in this sense, and I consider this, where we were talking about that maturity curve, kind of here on that far right, where we're trying to identify the things that seem to waste a lot of our time. And I think I've seen it in terms of benefiting one-man teams or one-person teams who are running security up to having teams of 60 people. There's always a means for being able to automate, and that's part of what I understand to be very beneficial for organizations. And so cost, I have to just mention this real quick. Part of what you want to try to achieve in terms of like return on investment, right? What does automation offer? Well, you can calculate the amount of time it takes to do certain things. If you put a monetary value on the amount of time it takes and be able to show that return, this ends up becoming a very positive way to be able to show back to your leadership, look how much time we're saving and this is exactly what you see in a lot of different products today, even outside of security when automation's involved. All right, that's all I had. You're here in the booth. Anything that I said, if you want to discuss more, happy to chat about it. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you for Threat Connect's wonderful support of AusCERT 2019. That's us done for today.